Hey guys, welcome back to our CCNA routing and switching series. In this episode, we will go ahead and take a further look onto the switch side. In the last couple of episodes, we have kind of briefly touched around the switch, how the switch went ahead and replaced hubs and few other. So before you physically install a switch, no matter it's a catalyst switch, no matter if it's a Nexus switch or any other modular chassis-based switch, we must first have to have the correct power and the operating environment. So when you want to install a switch, so when you are physically installing a switch, there are many ways you can go ahead and install a switch. You can go ahead and do a rack mount of a switch. You can go ahead and do a wall mount of a switch. You can also go ahead and simply place a switch on a table. Then we need to have the correct network cabling. You might need an Ethernet cable. Definitely you need some power cable and other. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the different type of switches. And again, this is not a very complete list. You can go ahead and do a simple search online and you might be able to find even more different type of switches from different vendors. So let's take a look at a couple of the switches. So when you're trying to install a switch, or pretty much every switch has a front panel as well as a back panel. So if you take a look at some of the older switches where the front and back panel had different type of ports. If you just simply take a look at the back panel had the power connectors, the AC power connector, the DC power connector, and here we have the console port. So you would need a console port, or you will use the console port to go ahead and connect to this switch, and you can go ahead and start configuring or start managing this particular switch. And on the front of the switch, we had a different varying number of ports and different type of ports also. So if you take a look at this switch, in this switch, these are 24 Ethernet 10 by 100, and these are the fixed ports. Also on this switch, on this side, we had 2 gigabit Ethernet ports. And this is one of the older generation of the Cisco switches. But if you take a look at the right hand side, we have 2 newer generation of switches. Again, there is a front side of a switch and this is the back side of a switch. So if you take a look at on this back side of a switch, primarily there are redundant power supplies. So you can see there are 2 power supply. So these are redundant. In case one power supply go down, you still have another power supply, and this is the fan chassis basically, or the modular fan. So the fans are housed here. On the front of this switch, we have different type of ports. So looking at these ports, it definitely looks like the 10BST kind of port, so means 10, 100 or 1 gigabit Ethernet port. And if you take a look at some of these ports, these definitely looks like some SFP based port. And then we have a network management port as well as a console port. If you take a look at another switch here at the bottom, we have some Ethernet ports here. There is definitely a management and a console port. There are some USB ports also. So that means you can go ahead and connect a USB drive to potentially upgrade the software on the switch, or you can copy some external files onto the switch. As well as this switch, if you see these 2 screw here, and this is a separate module that was installed later onto the switch. And this primarily, looking at this, these are primarily the 10 gig or 40 gig kind of a ports. And because this module was installed later on, these type of switches are called your modular switches again. And you can have a different type of switches. So there are few things which is common pretty much in every switch. So there are some ports where we can go ahead and connect our endpoint. There is definitely a console port, and there are some power ports. And you would need the correct power requirement, correct operating environment, correct cabling and all before you can go ahead and start using or start installing a switch. So let's say when you have everything sorted out, the very first time when you power on a switch, there is something called POST, P-O-S-T, that begins. So the POST stands for power on self test. As the name kind of indicates, when you're powering on, if doing some kind of a self test. So this self test is running a hardware diagnostic to make sure your switch is good. There are no hardware related problems. And during this post, there are a couple things happen. And one of the things that happens, there are some LED indicators on every switch. So if you take a look here, on the switch, these are the LED indicators. There are some LED indicators here on this particular switch, and there are LED indicators on this particular switch. So there are, during the post, the switch LED indicator will blink, while a series of tests really determines the functionality of that switch, whether that switch is working or not. And if everything is good, you will finally see switches get booted up into the Cisco's iOS software, and you will be presented with a console that you can go ahead and then start managing that particular switch. Within this whole process of the post, the LED indicator serves a pretty solid purpose, and it makes a perfect sense to know the name and the meaning of each different of these LED indicators. Again, every switch has a different type of LEDs, but there are a lot of LEDs which are common across most of the platform. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example switch and the different LEDs that are available on that particular switch. So in this case, we are looking one of Cisco's as a CAT platform, which is also called catalyst switches. So on this catalyst switches, there are different type of LED indicators. So if we start from LED indicator which says A that kind of points back to SYST. So that kind of SYST really says system. This LED indicator shows the overall system status. It tells the overall status of your switch, how your switch is doing. Is this switch is good? Is it bad or something? And that's what you say A is really here, the system LED. Followed by SYST, we have RPS, that is denoted by here B. RPS stands for redundant power supply. We just talked earlier in the previous slide. So this really suggests that do we have a redundant or extra power supply on the switch or not. In case if you don't have a redundant power supply and that only power supply goes bad, that means your switch becomes unusable. So in that case, it makes sense to have a switch with the RPS. After RPS, we have third, which is denoted by C here, is STAT, S-T-A-T. So this STAT, we also had the SYST that was for the overall system. This STAT is for each port. And if the port, the Ethernet port where we have something connected, if it's on, that really indicates that each port LED, the status of that particular port. Followed by STAT, we have a duplex port. So I'm sure you might have guessed duplex, if it's again on, each port LED simply implies the duplex of that port. If it's on, by default it's full duplex, and if that is not on, that means that port is operating into the half duplex mode. Followed by duplex, we have another port, that the LED indicator that indicates the speed. Again, if on means it's going to be green. If on, each port LED simply implies the speed of that port. So again, this varies from one switch to another switch. You might be working with a newer generation switch where each port by default might be a gig port or a 10 gig port. And if you're working on an older switch, that might just simply be a 10 Mbps or a 100 Mbps kind of a port. Followed by speed, we have a PoE. So PoE stands for Power on Ethernet or Power over Ethernet. So that means it's a mechanism of supplying the power using the Ethernet cable. So there are devices which does support this kind of mechanism. So if you have certain devices, you can go ahead and plug those devices into this port, and that would go ahead and indicate that. And then we have another big button on this switch that is called the mode. So this is simply a button that you can cycle through, and that can go ahead and cycle through the different states of these particular port. And last but not least, these are the port where we'll go ahead and connect the endpoint. And on top of each single port, we have an LED indicator that would go ahead and simply shows the status of that particular port. So that could be a green. That means the switch is powered on and operational and everything is looking good. Or you can have another state. You might see some port into the amber means. That means the switch post-process has failed and the Cisco IO software did not really load. That means there is something wrong with the switch, even though it's powered on, but it's not able to boot. Another state is off. That means simply the switch is simply powered off. So these are some of the different LEDs which are available on your switch, and they have a different meaning. Now, once you have a switch, now we have powered on the switch. After powering on the switch, we need to go ahead and start managing or start configuring that switch, so we can go ahead and do some kind of a configuration. So just like we work with computer or anything, you have a keyboard, mouse, and monitor. But in the case of switch, it doesn't come with any keyboard, mouse, and monitor. So on every switch, you have a console port. So to connect to the switch, you would need a console cable. And nowadays, the latest machines don't have this kind of a serial port. So we might need a USB to serial adapter that we can go ahead and make use. And when you are trying to connect to the serial port of switch, these are the settings that probably you would need to go ahead and do into a serial port communication software. And there are a lot of serial port communication software out there. The most common in the old days used to be Hyperterminal. Nowadays you can use PuTTY, you can use Secure CRT, or any other serial port communication software that you prefer, that you want to go ahead and make use of simply. And once you have all of these things, you can go ahead and connect to the console of the switch and one end to a computer, and then you can go ahead and start managing your switch pretty much. And once you are logged onto a switch, you can go ahead and start executing some of the show commands and some of the other things related with a switch. And we'll go ahead and explore some of these things in our hands-on exercise right now. So for our hands-on exercise, we will be using this topology. In my topology, if you take a look at, there is a router, and that router is connected to one of our switch, and the name of that switch is switch 2. The switch 2 connects to another switch, and the name of that switch is switch 1. With the switch 1, we have one of our endpoint connected, and with the switch 2, we also have another endpoint connected. So this will be the topology that we will be using for our hands-on exercise. So in this exercise, unfortunately, I cannot show you the physically how I have connected the console and all, but I have connected to the console. I have powered on my switches. So once we log in, like once you boot the switch, you will be presented with the console. So we will have access to the console, and from there we will go ahead and start configuring or start managing this switch, and we'll go ahead and do some basic configuration on our switch, and we'll go ahead and also explore some of the show related commands available on a switch. Again, this is not going to be a complete list, but this will go ahead and get you started, and we will go ahead and build the rest of the thing on top of this lab. Okay, so I went and logged in to our first switch. So the console that you see on the left hand side, I have logged on to my switch number 1, which is this switch in this topology. Now you can see once the switch is booted up, we are presented with the console. So now let's go ahead and start configuring the switch. So before you can go ahead and configure your switch, you would need to make this user, or we need to go into the privilege mode, which is also known as exec mode. So to go from the user mode to the exec or privilege mode, you would have to type the command enable. And once you do the enable, you can see your prompt is being changed from, instead of greater than symbol, to a pound symbol. In this case, because we have not done any configuration, there was no password configuration. So that's the reason when we went to the exec mode, there was no password requirement. But we can also go ahead and enable or configure a exec password if we need to do that. Again, the good thing about the Cisco devices, we can go ahead and use abbreviation. So instead of typing the whole enable, I can just simply type en, and I can go ahead and simply press an enter, and that would go ahead and complete my command automatically. Now before we can go ahead and start doing any configuration, to configure a switch, we need to go from the exec mode to the configuration mode. And to go from the exec mode to the configuration mode, we need to use a command by name configure terminal. So now let's go ahead and do that. So I'll go ahead and type config, and I'm just pressing a tab, and I'm typing ter, I'm pressing a tab. So you can go ahead and do that. You don't have to type the full command, but it's good to have initial practice. You should go ahead and type the complete command. So now from the exec mode, we are going into the configuration mode. So we can go ahead and start doing some config. And once we go into the configuration mode, you would see our prompt also changes. So now if I go to the config mode, you can see now we are into the config mode. So this is the host name of this switch. And now it clearly indicates, okay, hey, we are into the configuration mode. And now, as I said, we are working with this switch 1. So let's go ahead and change this visible name, that the name you see here, that's also known as the host name for the switch. So now let's go ahead and change the host name of this switch from generic switch to probably switch 1. And for that, we will go ahead and use a command by name hostname, because we are trying to change the host name of the switch, and the name of this switch is switch 1. And now just simply go ahead and press enter. As soon as you press enter, you will see the name of the switch was changed from switch to switch 1, and we are still inside the configuration mode. And now once we are done, if let's say we are done, we can come out of this configuration mode by typing the exit command. But we will go ahead and do some more configuration. So in this topology, we will be making use of one of our VLAN, and that is VLAN 1. So if you take a look at, I have not configured any VLAN, so I'm just typing exit, and to see the VLAN on this switch, we can go ahead and type the command show VLAN and go ahead and press enter. And you would see on this switch, there are some VLAN present by default, and that's why the name says default. And the number for that VLAN is VLAN number 1. Now for this VLAN number 1, we'll go ahead and assign an IP address to this particular VLAN. So now to do that, let's go ahead again into the, we are in exec mode. Let's go into the config mode. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and type config terminal or configure terminal. Now we are saying interface VLAN 1. So we are creating a layer 3 interface. Then that interface type is of a VLAN. We could have a Ethernet interface also if you wanted, but in this case we will be using this VLAN interface, and the number for this VLAN is VLAN number 1. To assign an IP, again within any prompt you can go ahead and press a question mark to see the available list of commands. So we will be using this IP command which says interface internet protocol config command. So we will be using this IP command. Again, after IP I can go ahead and press a question mark to see the options available after IP. So one of the options that we are interested into is called address, which says set the IP address of an interface. And in this case, the interface that we are working is your interface VLAN 1. So I'll go ahead and type interface address. Now with this interface address, again I'm pressing a question mark. It says, okay, hey, you can go ahead and specify an IP address into this particular form. So I will go ahead and assign an IP address of 10.10.1.2. Then again I'm pressing a question mark. It says, okay, now after typing the IP address, you are expected to provide an IP address mask or IP subnet mask. So now in this case, I'm typing my subnet mask. And don't worry, we will go ahead and explore the IP, the subnet mask into some of the later on exercise. Now once we are done, now by default, all the ports are in kind of a shutdown state. Now we need to bring those ports from shut to no shut. So for that, we will go ahead and use a command by name no shut down. If you want to bring a port down, you can go ahead and use the shutdown command. And once that is done, you can clearly see a message showing up. It says, okay, here link 3 up down. And the interface VLAN state to up, change to up. Earlier it was down. Now it clearly says line protocol interface VLAN state changed to up also. So now once that is done, I can simply come out of this configuration mode by using the exit command. Now if I want to see again, if I want to come out of further from here, now we just came out from the interface configuration mode. Now if you want to come out from the complete configuration mode, you can retype the exit command again. But if you see, we are working with this particular switch. Now we will go ahead and configure a default gateway on this switch. So that means anything this switch doesn't know, it can send it to the default gateway. And in this case, our router will be the default gateway, and on that router I have configured an IP address of 10.10.1.1. So now I will go ahead and configure a default gateway on this switch. So in case if this switch needs to send it something that it's not able to resolve locally, it can send it to its default gateway. And to configure a default gateway on a switch, you would use the IP command. But remember last time we had used the address. So instead of address, now we will go ahead and make use of something called this default gateway. It says specifies default gateway. So now we'll say IP default gateway. After default gateway, it's expecting an IP address. So I'll go ahead and type an IP address 10.1.1. And once that is done, I'll go ahead and simply press an enter. So we just went ahead and configured a IP default gateway onto our switch. Now again, if you take a look at on this switch, with this switch on Ethernet port 01 is connected to this particular PC, and Ethernet 00 of this switch is connected to this switch number 2. So now let's go ahead and provide a description onto our port, so that way we can identify those ports. What do I mean by that? If you type an exit here again, and if you type command here, show interfaces, or let's go ahead and do that here. So we'll say show interfaces summary. So in the case of summary, it shows the available number of ports on this particular switch. And if you want to see the startup configuration onto switch, we can go ahead and type the show running config. So when you take a look at the show running config, you would see the configuration on this switch. And if you recall, we went ahead and changed the host name to switch 1 here. And if you scroll further here, you would see there are some interfaces available on this switch. But we really don't know just by looking at this interface, okay, hey, this interface is connected to what device. If you don't have this diagram as to refer, there is no way from here just by saying, okay, hey, Ethernet 0 belongs to probably to switch 2, 1 belongs to this PC1. So we can go ahead and provide a description to these interfaces using the description command. That way, just by looking at the show config or show running config on a switch, we know what port is connected to what device. So again, to configure, we are in exec mode. We need to go into the configure mode. So for that, we'll go ahead and type configure terminal. So now let's go ahead and configure the first Ethernet 00. So I'll go ahead and type the interface Ethernet 0/0. And this is the interface. And if you see, this interface is connected to our switch number 2. So for that, what are the available commands here? We can press a question mark, and there are a lot of commands which are available. And one of the command that we are interested into is your description command, which says specify interface description. So we'll go ahead and say description. And if you press a question mark, it says, okay, hey, you can write some character, a maximum number of 200 characters. So we'll just simply say, okay, hey, description, link to our switch 2. And once we are done on this interface, I can just simply type an exit command. We are back into again a global configuration mode. Now we can go ahead and provide a description to our interface Ethernet 01. So we'll say interface Ethernet 0/1. Again, I can go ahead and say description and then say link to our PC1. In this case, we have this PC1 connected to this particular interface, and I'm just typing an exit again. So that way we just came out from the interface config mode. Instead of typing an exit, we can go ahead and simply type an end. If you type an end anyway here, you will immediately come out of any kind of a configuration mode directly to the exit mode also. So instead of typing multiple exit, we can go ahead and simply type an end command here. Or we can also go ahead and make use of a keyboard shortcut, Control Z. That would do pretty much the same here. Now we have went ahead and did some basic configuration on the switch. When initially our switch boots up, so during the booting of the switch, there are two types of configuration. There is something called startup configuration and there is something called running configuration. Startup configuration says, okay, when a switch boots up, what configuration is it booting up with? That's called its startup configuration. While running configuration, what is the present running configuration on my switch? So if you take a look here, I'm doing show running config. I'm trying to see, okay, hey, what is my current running configuration? So it's okay, hey, this is your running configuration where your host name is switch 1 and your interface has, these are the descriptions. So this is our current running configuration. If you want to take a look at the startup configuration, that means when the switch was booted, what is the configuration this switch was booted? So we can go ahead and say show startup config. So it says, okay, when the switch was booted, the name of the switch was switch and there were no descriptions available on a switch. So that means that is our startup configuration and that is our running configuration. Now we made some change. So when you make a change, if you like your change, it's good to have those changes saved. That means in case if you go ahead and reboot your switch, you will not lose your config that you have just done that. And we can go ahead and save our config by using the copy command. So we'll just simply say copy. Now we can go ahead and specify, okay, hey, I want to copy my running configuration to my startup configuration. That way we are ensuring if the switch reboots, whatever the config changes that we made are persisted across a reboot. And for that we can go ahead and use the copy command. On a switch, we can also go ahead and take a look at some specific configuration instead of doing the whole show run. So I can just do show running, and I want to take a look at the configuration of my VLAN 1 that we had just done that. Now in this case, it shows, okay, we have an interface VLAN 1, and this is the IP address, and this is the subnet mask that we have configured earlier. There are many more show commands that we can go ahead and use. I can just simply say show IP interface brief. And in this case, it's showing me all the interfaces where we have an IP configured. So in this case, it shows, okay, these are the interfaces available. They don't have an IP address assigned, but their state is up. But if you take a look at VLAN 1, it says, okay, VLAN 1 has an IP address of 10.10.1.2, and currently it's up. Now, we can go ahead and verify few things in this case. We can go ahead and verify from this switch, see if we can go ahead and reach our PC1, PC2, and our router R1. And if you remember, I had said the router R1 is 10.10.1. So now just simply do ping.ping 10.10.1.1. That is the IP address of our router. So now we are trying to ping from the switch. So the traffic went to switch 2, and from there it went to our router R1. I can go ahead and also ping these two PCs, the PC1 and PC2. The PC1, the IP address I have configured is 10.10.1.10. So I can go ahead and verify that from 10.10.1.10. And from switch 1, I am able to reach this PC1. My PC2 has an IP address of .20. So instead of 10, I can go ahead and simply say .20. So from this switch 1, I am pinging this particular PC2. And to ping, we went ahead and used the ping command. So ping command is making use of something called ICMP protocol. When you do a ping, you are using ICMP protocol. ICMP stands for Internet Control Message Protocol. And this ICMP protocol, because we are doing a ping, we are doing the networking thing. So it operates at network layer, that's correct. And it operates at the layer 3 also. So the network layer or internet protocol, it just simply reports any error, anything pretty much. So for this, we are using the ICMP echo request, and we are waiting for a reply after each request. So that's why if you see, it says, okay, hey, it sent that many number of requests and all. Sometime it is common for a timeout to occur for the first echo packet, because this is the very first time the system is trying to send something, and it needs to find all that information. And if you recall how the switches kind of discovers using that MAC address and all. So it is building that particular MAC address table. We can also go ahead and make use of some special switches. So if I do show running and if I press a question mark, there's something called output modifier. So I can use the pipe symbol, and after that I can go ahead and make use of certain things to filter certain config. Like can I say include, hey, just show me my things that starts with default, that has default. So it says, okay, you have a line that has a default. And if I want to see that route configured, I can go ahead and make use of the command show IP route. And in this case, it says your default gateway is 10.10.1.1. And these are some of the things that we can go ahead and verify. Again, we can go ahead and make use of any other things. Like you want to take a look at a particular section, you can go ahead and do that. If you want to exclude certain thing, you can go ahead and do that too. Now let's go ahead and take a look at like show interface status. Okay, hey, what is the status of my interfaces? Right now it says, okay, hey, your Ethernet 0. This is the description, and it is connected. The VLAN type is a trunk. The duplex is auto, the speed is auto, and type is unknown. And these are some of the things that we can go ahead and take a look at from this particular output. We can go ahead and also make use of the show version command. So the show version command is pretty interesting. It tells you a lot of things about this particular one. It will show you, okay, hey, the number of ports available, the model, the software version this system is running with, and some of the other thing that you can take a look at simply. It also shows for how long this particular thing has been up. We can go ahead and make use of the show interfaces command. So the show interfaces command shows you quite a bit of thing. So now let's go ahead and take a look at Ethernet 00. We know Ethernet 0. Let's take a look at Ethernet 01, which is connected to our PC. So in this case, Ethernet 01, here it says up. That means this particular interface is up. Line protocol is up. That means the layer 2 and layer 1 connectivities are good on this one. This is the MAC address for this particular interface. Here is the description that we had configured. This is the MMTU, maximum transmission unit, that will go ahead and take a look. The default is 1500 byte. The bandwidth of this interface kilobits per second. The keep alive, the duplex setting right now that you can go ahead and take a look at here. There are a few other things here. You can also see the 5-minute input rate on this particular port, 5-minute output rate on this particular port. Are there any input errors on this particular port? Are there any CRC errors on this particular port? Are there any packets? Do you see any kind of a collision being happening on this particular or not? So these are some of the things that we can go ahead and verify or take a look at with the help of this show interfaces command. And there are many more commands that you can go ahead and just simply do show, and you can press a question mark, and that would give you a lot more detail. So just type another command, probably like show controllers. So the show controller kind of gives you some other detail, the hardware statistics about. So it says, okay, interface Ethernet 00. These are some of the hardware related stuff with this particular switch. We can go ahead and take a look at the MAC address table that we had talked about. So for that, the command is show MAC, and after MAC it says the address table, which will show us the MAC forwarding table. So I can just say show MAC address table, and it would show the MAC this switch has learned. So it says, okay, it has learned on VLAN 1 this particular MAC address. The type of that MAC address is dynamic, and that MAC address is sitting on this Ethernet port 00. Again, there are many more show commands that you can go ahead and take a look at using the show, and that's how we can go ahead and start exploring the switch. We can go ahead and do certain configuration and few other things. Hopefully you got a little bit of idea about the switches, the different configuration that you can do on a switch, the different type of ports that are available, and how do you really go ahead and about configuring a switch. So that'll be all for this episode. I will see you guys in next episode. Thank you.